Hello, friends. Welcome to the C3 podcast. I'm your host and co-creator, Myron Isaiah Bryant. Thank you for taking the time to listen and being a part of our community. At its core, C3 exists to create a safe space for us all to be humans first, learn from each other's professional and life experiences, and choose to co-create a healthy community of betterment. I'm excited for today's conversation with our guest. And with that, let's dive into the episode. Hello, everyone. This is Myron Bryant. Welcome to the C3 podcast. On this episode, we're talking with a good friend and coach of mine, Coach Carl, on his professional journey, the values he carried along to be successful, and some lessons he learned along the way. Without any further ado, hello, Coach. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm ready for the weekend here.
Excellent.
I know we've been working together for a couple of really almost probably half a year, a little bit over half a year now. And I've been very positively impacted by your coaching, particularly in running, right, is where you coach specifically, and just fitness plans and preparing for the Peachtree Road Race there. So thank you for the gems you share with me. I'm excited for you to share some of those gems with our audience here today. But I know and work closely with you, Coach Carl, but you're new to a lot of people here. Who is Coach Carl and as just a person before we get started?
Professionally, I am a coach. That's what I do as my job, and I am married. I have two daughters who are early elementary school / just heading into elementary school. So they keep me at least as busy as my job does, and and one of the things that has been really good about the coaching profession is that it allows me the flexibility to be at their events and handle a lot of the school duties with them too. So yeah, I would say equal parts.
What I heard was a full life there, right? Of balancing the work, the life, the human aspect, right? Which is big what we talk about here in the podcast, is making everything as human as possible, right?
Sure.
And you talked about being a coach, right? Has that been your entire professional career, or how did you kind of get into coaching? What's been your professional journey so far?
Kind of close to it. When I graduated college, I spent 2 years working essentially as a teaching assistant at Colorado College, where I graduated from in the sociology department. And then I moved to Atlanta in 2005 and started volunteering with the Emory track and cross country teams. I guess it was the spring of 06, and then took over as the men's cross country and distance track coach in the fall of 06. And I did that for 8 years. And then at that point, Jess and I had met. We had gotten married. We were talking about having kids. And we were both in the or of the opinion that the collegiate coaching lifestyle was not going to work with kids. And so that's when I left Emory and started coaching privately and focusing on adults. And so that'll be 10 years this June in a month. So, yeah.
Happy early anniversary.
Thank
it's
you.
always good whenever you have that alignment too, right? You both agreed on, hey, this is the path we want to go on. That is almost coaching and plans in itself.
That's correct. And so I started in 2014 because we knew we didn't want to have kids right away. But we also knew that it was going to take a little while to get the business built up to the point where, that's what I could do just full time. At the time, I was working part time at a running store to kind of, balance the books, so to speak. And then, but by the time our oldest came along in 2016, coaching had grown to the point where I could just do that. So, yeah, it's been great.
And one thing that you mentioned, right, is you've been very much a coach, a teacher, and in the field of running, more or less your entire career. What's been the values that have helped you be successful throughout the career you've had so far?
Sure. I think there's a few different things that maybe set me apart a little bit. Just based on what people have told me their experiences have been elsewhere. First and foremost is that I come into each sort of runner coach relationship with the understanding that I work for the runner, right? My goals for the runner are not important. What's important is what I can do to help you reach your goals. And, I think, to be perfectly honest, I think coaching at Emory first really helped with that. I
Yeah.
think it helped sort of get some of the competitiveness out. For lack of a better term, it sort of helped stroke my coaching ego a little bit more, to the point where now, like, I can, do a better job of making it athlete centered and not coach centered.
Yep.
And so I think that's one thing. And then the biggest thing in it, and it kind of ties into this, but I half jokingly say that I built my entire coaching, business on the idea that running is an important part of your life, but it's not the only important part of your life. And so
Yeah.
being willing to work around that and find ways, and not try to force people to fit into a specific Coach Carl system, is I think the other thing that I would attribute it to.
I love both of those. And, maybe starting at the second one first, right? I was,
Sure.
as a overachiever, right? I'm always trying to overachieve. When we first started working together, I remember you're like, "Oh, I realized that I coach people who also have professional jobs," but I had this
Right.
mindset like I was going to come work at Coach Carter and somehow get to the Olympics. And I quickly realized
Right.
within
Right.
like
Right.
2 weeks that, for many reasons, not just the time, I don't think I'm physically gifted enough to make it there. But I appreciate that now. Again, months down the road, like, you
Right.
help me balance meeting those goals we just talked about, right? That I'm still driving towards, preparing for Peachtree Road Race here in a couple months, yet still being able to be productive in my work day to day, in the podcast, in my relationships, in real life there. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably a thing that you probably see from time to time, that people are so excited to get going, but then they begin to really realize how important it is that you create plans for people that are able to balance that and have that sustainability.
Yeah, and I try to be so upfront with people from the beginning of that, when I write a training plan, my goal is for that training plan to be enjoyable and sustainable
Hmm.
long term, right? So, I'm not going to try to run you into the ground in the short term to hit this one specific goal. I want you to enjoy it enough that you keep going, and you keep training after that, because ultimately that's how you're going to see real improvement as a distance runner, right? Like, nobody maxes out their distance running potential in 6 months, or even a year or 18 months, right? So, if it's not enjoyable, if it's not sustainable, then I feel like I'm not giving you the best experience that I can,
Yeah.
in the running world. And I love running so much that I want to make sure that I'm not the reason that somebody decides to hate running and gets burned out on it. So,
No, I love that. I mean, there's so many things I think in today's world that's, instant gratification, right? It feels like
mm-hmm.
we're always trying to sprint to the finish line of whatever it is, not just running, right? But like
Right,
anything in
right.
life, we just want as fast as possible. So you coming at
Yep.
it from perspective of having that sustainability. Hey, I want you to enjoy this. I want you not to just enjoy it short term, but long term, and get better and continue to,
Right.
be your best self. Like, those are things that's an intentionality that many people don't have today, that I just genuinely appreciate when working with you.
Yeah, correct. No, 100%. So much of distance running sort of goes against how the rest of modern society works, that it can be tough for people to make that disconnect. Yeah.
Yeah. And you started off by talking about, creating the plans for the runners themselves, right? Of,
Mhm.
hey, it's not Coach Carl's goals or objectives for the runners. It's
Right.
actually their plan, and to make that for them. And again, similar to what we talk about with society here as well, is it's so easy to be just a consumer, and just kind of
Right.
going along with others' plan. Whether you're in sales, whether you're engineer, whatever your role is, or coach, obviously, it's always best to have that co-creation and know that you're creating a path for someone that they're invested in, not just, hey,
Yes.
take it or leave it. So
That's
again,
right.
I love the values that you've mentioned to get us started here. Now, you mentioned, being in love with running, going from being a TA and then kind of starting as a
Mm-hmm.
coach. Had you coached before that college period, or what kind of got you interested in this coaching thing as a career path?
Yeah, I say I'm dating myself here. This is 20 years ago. Yeah, I don't remember what the exact thought process was, other than that I miss being around the team. I
Yeah.
missed sort of being in that setting. I missed, one of the things that I talked about a lot with the guys when I was at Emory was that when you graduate and when you go off into the real world, it's
Yeah.
really rare to have that feeling that you're part of a team all working for the same goal. And
Yep.
it's kind of such a unique experience to the collegiate experience, that I just missed it, and I wanted to be around it again. And yeah, so I had emailed, I forget, 4 or 5 different high schools, and then I had emailed Emory just to say, hey, I'm happy to come do whatever you might need. And Emory was the only one that got back to me. So I started volunteering with them, and then like I said, just sort of the men's distance coach left at the end of that school year. So they had an opening, and by then I knew the guys and had a good relationship with them, and so was able to move into there. But yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, running has been such an enjoyable part of my life, that I want other people to be able to experience that. But also, initially, like I said, it was partly just I just missed being around that kind of team aspect, and that competition too. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many takeaways from that story, right? Of you putting yourself out there to even email, a couple schools, right, to say, hey,
right,
like,
right,
I love this thing. I just want to be a part of it, however I can. I
yeah,
think that shows just an amazing amount of grit and really just true love and putting yourself out there to be a part of, that sport. And then one thing you mentioned as well is like wanting to be around it, right? And that's one thing
yeah,
I think running is unique for as well. Is like every running community I've joined. Sometimes I go to Nike Run Club here in Atlanta.
mm-hmm.
Obviously, they have Atlanta Track Club. Like every running community I've been a part of, even just a 5K with just one random Saturday, you may never see these people again. The community of running is just so amazing and welcoming and positive. And
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't get exposed to earlier on in life, but I just, to your point, have fallen in love with it since starting to engage there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you know I think the community is a great part of it, and I think one of the things that I realized as I was transitioning from college to coaching adults is that it is such a welcoming community. Um, and full of well-intentioned, well-meaning people that maybe don't pass on the best advice to the people that are new to the community, right? So it's seeing the opportunity for a role of providing a resource in that regard too. I felt was a
It's definitely necessary. I've heard some crazy things and it's starting to get running,
Sure,
but
yeah,
that's
yeah,
why I
and,
called
and
it
and
cold
it's partly
Carl.
because everybody's an experiment of one, and so somebody found what works for them, and they're telling some poor guy who showed up for a group run for the first time, that they need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and so anyway, it's yeah, it's a very enthusiastic community for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned something important there, and it goes back to your first value of not just what works for you, but like what works for the other person. And that's,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, everything from coaching to just even leadership, right? It can be so easy in coaching, in leadership, in any role, if you're a high performer, to want to push your way onto someone else because it worked for me. This is my one experience. I know it works. But
Yep.
you've taken a different path there. You've been very intentional about getting to know the person and the runner and their goals and creating a plan for them. How do you kind
Now,
of think
now,
about that,
now, I
right?
now I'm intentional about that.
I love you, coach.
I didn't
This
start out
because we're
that way,
honest.
but yeah,
I love the honesty. How did
yeah,
you
yeah.
how did you learn that, and how do you go about that, right?
Yeah, well, so I think I mean, the first year that I coached, that I was like in charge of the men's cross country team at Emory. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, to be perfectly blunt, I was not particularly qualified.
yeah,
Sorry,
you're
that was not a position that I probably needed a little more seasoning in the volunteer assistant role first. But yeah, I mean, I knew what had worked for me. I just assumed it would work for everybody. I realized very quickly, like that first semester, that first cross country season, I was like, okay, this is not what's going to work. But to use the metaphor that I go back to a lot, like my coaching toolbox was still pretty empty, right? Like I didn't have a
yeah,
ton of things to fall back on, and different ways to train people. So, it was a slow progression there, maybe those first couple of years, and then you really started to figure out, like, because it's different in a team setting, right? Like, you can't
Yeah.
have 22 different guys doing 22 different things and have it feel like a team. So you kind of had to balance it a little bit. And so that was one thing that I was really excited about when I left collegiate coaching, was like, okay, philosophically, I believe in this idea of really individualizing the training to the person and their life and everything else, but I haven't been able to put that into practice 100%. So let's do that, and let's see how it goes. And it's been great. And so over the years, just getting the reps in, right? Like,
Yeah.
you learn
Yeah.
different approaches, you learn different little tricks and ways that you can twist things. And you look at something like the marathon, everybody's got to run the same distance, and so
Yep.
there's certain things that are an absolute, but how we get you there can vary quite a bit. And I think it's difficult to really learn the different variety at your disposal without just experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing you said there is, everyone has to run the same distance, and that's something I think is a great metaphor for all parts of life, right? Whatever your
Sure.
day job is, or whatever you're trying to do, right? You're typically measured on something that's pretty collective as a team
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, or comparatively to your peers, right? But
Yep.
you're very intentional about figuring out a way that makes that journey specific to that person.
Right.
And in sales, what we typically call that is discover, like, hey, you get to understand who this person is and what's important to them and how they want to get from where they are today to where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of think about that first call or those first interactions and understanding how you might start to create that plan for someone? So I know we
Mm-hmm.
spent quite a bit of time on our first call identifying my
Yep.
goals and what was important to me and time I had, when I like to work out versus when I didn't. So it was
Mm-hmm.
very intentional. How do you think
Yep.
about just from the first interaction being able to create that?
Yeah. So the things that I'm always interested in and need to leave that first conversation with is, what are
Yeah.
your goals, right? Um, I would say included in that is, what is your motivation, right? Why is this
Yeah.
goal important to you? I think is important. And then the other piece of it is, how can a coach be most helpful to you, right? Because for some people, it's like, I got tons of motivation. I'll run all day, all night. I just need to be told what to do. For other people, it's like, I will run all day, but I will hurt myself, so I need to be told what not to do. Whatever it is. And I usually just ask people that question straight out: how would a coach be most helpful to you?
Yeah.
What is it about where you're at with your running right now that's causing you to seek out a coach at this moment?
Yeah.
Because something caused you to email me or to fill out the form on the website or whatever. So, and I think people usually are aware of what that is. I think they usually give, pretty truthful and pretty accurate answers. But then I know, okay, with this person, I need to, let's say motivation is an issue. I need to make
Yeah.
sure that what I put on their training schedule is light enough that they'll be able to do it and then feel good that they did it. Because
Yeah.
if they say, I can run, this happens a lot, people will be like, oh, I can run 3 to 4 times a week. It's like, great, when I write out the training plan, it's going to be 3 times a week, because I want you to do
Yeah.
that 3 times. I want you to feel good about it, and then start to build momentum with that. But if I don't ask, how would a coach be most helpful, if I don't get that answer of, I need motivation, then I'm not going to know that that's the best way to structure their plan. So um, that might be a little bit of a roundabout answer, but I think the how would a coach be most helpful? What are your goals and what are your motivations are sort of the biggest building blocks, and then the rest of it is all helpful, as far as
Yeah.
like what types of running you like, what types of running you don't like. Do you like to run with a group? Do you not like to run with a group? All those kinds of things. But all of that is still going to be put together under the umbrella of, what are your goals and how can a coach be most helpful?
I love that. I think it's so universal, right? To what we all do, right? Whether we're coaches or, as I said, sales, engineers, corporate, day to day, whatever that job is like. hey, what's your goals? Why are you here
Yeah.
right now? Is what you said as well. Why are you
Right.
engaging me
Right.
now? What have you run into? How can I support you? Like, it's such a simple thing, but
Hmm.
taking the time to do that really just allows you to create that plan you talked about to make sure someone's successful. And then one thing I love you said as well is you took into account not just getting to the goal, but the journey, right? And what I
Right.
mean by
Right.
that is you're saying, hey, if someone says I can run 3 to 4 times a week, I'm just going to start them off at three. I think so often people in this, instant gratification culture want to just get you there. And
Right.
as you talk
Right.
about, that's where you kind of get hurt in running sense.
Yep.
You get hurt if you just push too far. It's like, how
Yep.
can I actually create a sustainable path for them to get there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in that specific example, I think if that person runs the 3 times a week, they're going to feel good about it. They're not going to be sitting at the end of the week
Yeah.
saying, well, but I only ran 3 times a week. Like they're going to say,
Yep.
I checked every box on this training plan. Like I feel great about that. And that's as important as, the nuts and bolts of the training. But also, all of this is sort of why it's difficult to use generic training plans, right? Because
Yep.
and why I don't provide any either. Because
Yep.
people ask all the time, oh, do you just have like a basic couch to 5K? It's like no, because I don't think that it's going to work. I mean, I'm not going to put my name on that. And
Yep.
so yeah, it's the difference between a plan for you and a plan that you found.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do think it makes a big difference.
And one thing that specifically for me, I can say like the optional days that you included in my
Yeah.
training plans. To your
Right.
point,
Right.
like every week I feel happy because I check off at least the 3 4 days. But then every once in a
Right.
while I do optionally, I feel extra happy. Like, oh, I really
Yeah.
did a
Right.
great one.
But you don't feel bad if you don't do them because they're
I
optional.
don't
Right.
because they're
Right.
optional. And
Right.
again,
Yep.
just the intentionality of doing that is a big difference. That
Hmm.
sustainable, right, makes a huge impact for me there. You
And it's
talked
so
as
funny
well
with
about
runners because I have to always say this is truly optional, right? Because most runners will see it and they'll be like, okay, well, so that I'm doing that, like that has to happen. It's like, no, if I write
yep.
optional, I mean it. This is not like reverse psychology. There's no like tricks here. Like this is the real thing. So
I love that. I think the first week or two to my Olympic path, I did all
right.
the optionals. Then I really actually, I was like, "Are these really optional?" And then you're like, "Yes." I was like, "Okay, I'm going to do them sometimes.
That's
Sometimes
right.
I
That's
won't
right.
be mad at
Yeah,
myself either
because
way."
yeah, and because the phrase that I use more than any other is that stress is stress, right?
Yep.
And the
Yep.
only stress that we usually can control is the training stress that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
So if everything else is going haywire in your life, you got to back off on the training stress.
Yeah. One thing that I appreciate as well is that I've been able to call, text you, just kind of check in. You've been proactive
Mm-hmm.
about reaching out to me as well about how the training plan is going.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important because to your point about the couch to 5Ks, like it's not personal, but also it's not updated. So you're
Mm-hmm.
checking in on me about, hey, how's my weightlifting going? Because I wanted to make
Right.
sure I continue to upkeep muscle mass, or how did this run feel versus that feel, or I know at one point we included more inclines, right? So
Right.
that
Right.
type of
Yep.
check in was so important for me. I think just another just best practice in coaching in all walks of life, and not
Mm-hmm.
just setting it and forgetting, but being able to walk someone along that journey and have a
Yeah.
true coach there.
Yeah. And to tag on to the end of that, one thing that I learned at some point, relatively early on, and this is another phrase I use a lot. We want to be responsive to how the training's
Yeah.
going, but we don't want to be
Yep.
reactionary. And so,
Yep.
I mean, everybody can have a bad run, everybody can have a bad week. It doesn't mean that things aren't progressing the way we want them to. It just means that it
Yep.
was a bad week. And so, like let's give it a little bit bigger sample size before we make some of those adjustments and make some of those modifications. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's that goes to what my day job is all the time, right? Of like, hey, creating plans for change and
right,
kind of helping people that change management. And there's going to be some tough days. I know even in your notes for the training plans, you had some notes about every run is a run of the day, right? Like sometimes it's
right,
easy, sometimes it's hard. But it's that day's run and walking people through those things. And then obviously responding, but not being
right,
reactive
right,
is
right.
important
Yep.
because you're going to have tough days.
Yes, yes, and like I said, it oftentimes doesn't mean anything other than you had a whole lot else going on that day. So yeah.
Yep. To your point, it's balancing the running and the rest of the things there.
Right. Exactly.
Consistency is a big part, right? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the main reasons people kind of search for a plan, right? Is to some degree, whether you call it motivation, whether you call it consistency. That's so
Mm-hmm.
important. And in this framing of, hey, we don't want to just get from where we're at to the goal and creating a journey. It's so easy just to want to get to the journey, to the end
Right.
goal, right? Or even find
Right.
a shortcut to that, right? So
Right.
for
Right.
my role in sales, right, a lot of people look up statistics about cold calling or calling their customers, responding to emails. When's the best
Mm-hmm.
time to do this? When's the best time to do that? But ultimately, that may increase your percentages by 2, 3, 4%. So if you
Mm-hmm.
skip a day, you miss
Yeah.
all that day versus not doing it at all. So in terms of
Right.
consistency, how do you see that playing into some of the plans you create to make sure that it's not just a shortcut, but there is a day in day out way to get to where you're looking to go?
Yeah. So a couple things to note here. One, just super briefly and super surface level on the physiology side,
Yeah.
our bodies are lazy, and so
Yep.
if we subject them to a stimulus, the initial response is to do nothing about it. And so there needs to be that consistency to actually like stimulate the body to have adaptations, to improve, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The biggest thing for the people that I work with is finding the time, right? Like, they've got jobs, they've got families, they've got whatever it is. And so I'm a big believer of, hey, let's make your weeks look very similar. Like
Hmm.
Monday, let's make if that's going to be your easy run day, let's always make it your easy run day. And there's some arguments out there, again, physiologically speaking, that uh, if we were getting you ready for the Olympics, Isaiah, we'd probably go for like a 10-day training cycle rather than a 7-day training cycle.
Yeah.
But for the real world, 7 days, like that's what we're going to
Yeah.
work with, because when you're trying to schedule the rest of your week or whatever, like if like, all right, I've got 40 minutes of easy running on Monday. That you don't have to think about it. You don't have to work around it. You don't have to do any of those things because it's a constant. And that I think really helps build the consistency. So going back to the other point too about making sure you don't bite off more than you can chew. Like the best way
Yeah.
to be consistent is to have an appropriate amount that you're trying to do. and
Yep.
and if you can do that, it's a lot easier to be consistent. And when I say appropriate, I mean both from a physical and from a rest of your life perspective.
I love that, right? And Mondays is typically my easy day. So
There you go. There you go.
I
As
look
it is
forward to
for a
Mondays.
lot of people. Yeah. Yeah. And it's good, right? Because Monday is usually a stressful work day. So it's good to keep that a non stressful running day. So,
It's a good balance there. I generally look forward to Mondays, right? I can only imagine if it was my hardest day, I'd be like, oh, Sunday night. Oh,
right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
gotta wake up and do what?
Yeah.
I feel like all throughout this episode, you've been great at educating, myself, our listeners. You have a YouTube channel with a lot of great videos there, a lot of great
Mm-hmm.
things on your website. You educate your clients really well, which I think is necessary for at least me personally in my one
Right.
experience, but just greatly appreciated because it's not just the plan, right? It's knowing why we're doing these things.
Right.
How
Right.
do you kind of process that, right? How important is it for you to educate, whether it be your clients today or just even when you're thinking about throughout your career coaching, even collegiate, telling
Yeah.
people the why and the physiology and just educating them so you know what we're doing, the reason behind that?
Yeah. So currently, working with adults, I really do it on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people that I work with that don't care. They're willing to trust whatever I put on the paper, and they're good with it, and like doesn't matter.
Yep.
But along with that, they're also good about following what I put on the paper.
Yep.
And I think most of the time the education piece comes in where it's like. uh, Most of the time it's because people are working too hard. And so,
Yep.
we need to explain the idea of, the hard work is the stimulus to improve, but the actual improvement happens during the rest and recovery period. So it's vital that we don't overdo that. So I tend to do most of the education at this point in my career if somebody asks for it, or if I feel like they're either misinterpreting or misapplying what I'm asking them to do. And I think that if they just understand it better, they'll either it's just that they just flat out don't understand what to do, or they feel like they have permission then to run easier, or they have permission to take
Yep.
days off because it is part of the plan and it is an important part of the process. And yeah, and at the collegiate level, right, they had a lot more time on their hands. They were 18 to 22-year-old young men who, yeah, you better sell them on why they're doing what they're doing, or there's going to be a lot of pushback. So there's less of it now than there was then. But I often joke that half of my job is just telling people to do less than what they were doing before we started working together. So that's probably the biggest piece of the education. And then there's other things as far as like race strategy, fueling, all those sorts of things too, that are a little bit more practical, and I probably get more questions about that than I do about hey, what is the purpose of this workout?
Yeah.
But I think if you know the purpose of the workout, then you can make sure that you do it in a way that achieves that purpose. So I think it's beneficial, but I also don't want anybody that I'm working with to feel like they have like reading assignments that they have to do on
Yep.
top of everything else they've got going on in their life. So yeah.
No, I love that, right? I mean, I generally just appreciate the teaching you've had for me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
whether it be through our one-on-ones, through the coaching plans, through YouTube, those are all just great ways. So I know the why behind things. I'm just try to be generally curious, and helps me in my
Sure,
own
sure.
training plans as well.
Well, and I love talking about it. Like often when somebody will send me like a 2 sentence question on email, and then it's like a 6 paragraph answer. It's like, no. I mean, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, but I also know that, for a large portion of my client base, they don't know, they don't care,
Yeah.
and they may not even be interested in it. So,
Yep. Yep. And you mentioned the recovery component as well, like how
hmm
important it
hmm
is that you have those rest days, or you choose to do less in certain days, right? I think
yep,
that's an important part of getting better, and knowing that we can't just sprint in life or on these races, that we have
right.
to recover. How important is that, right? As you talk about not just recovery, but eating right, taking the rest there, mental health, as you talk about having a
Mhm.
rough day and then trying to perform. How do you kind of think about making sure one is fueled and in a good position to be able to perform?
Yeah, I mean it's as important as the physical side of it, right? I mean it
Yeah.
literally is. And I mean rest. I mean there's the sort of stress adaptation curve is like the classic example of it, where literally like if you don't rest, you will not improve, and if you keep running hard without resting, then you'll just you'll get sicker. You'll get it. Your body will tell you that you need to rest one way or the other. When it comes to the other things, like psychologically, we're really good about compartmentalizing stress, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
family, work, whatever, relationships, whatever it is. Physiologically, we aren't. We don't. It doesn't matter where the stress comes from,
Yeah.
and so um, you just need to be. I mean, in a way, you need to be forgiving of yourself when it comes
Yeah.
to what the training was supposed to be that day, and if it's not there, it's not there, and that's fine. And in fact, it's beneficial because, like I said, the one source of stress that you usually can control is your training stress, right? Like we usually don't have a ton of control over work stress or family stress or you know daughter's randomly testing positive on a Friday when you're trying to finish a bunch of work. So, you've got to be flexible enough. And I think, I mean, I think this is another way that I am hopefully helpful to people is when
Yeah.
those situations come up, sort of identifying, okay, first of all, don't worry about it. But second
Yeah.
of all, like here's what we need to accomplish over the next 2 to 3 weeks, right? Like here's out of the runs that are on your training plan, here's what's important. Here's what isn't important. Here's the things that maybe on this workout, it's really important that you hit this pace. It's less important how far you go. Whereas
Yep.
on this workout, we need you to get the distance in, but I don't care how slow you go. So go as slow as you need to. So just understanding that that bumps in the road like that don't mean that you're not going to get to your destination. It may mean that you need to take a little detour, but it's you know let's use an example of a washed out bridge, right? Take a little detour. Maybe you don't get there
Yeah.
like right at the time you thought you were going to, but if you just plowed ahead, things are going to end much worse. So it's important to kind of keep all of that in mind. And again, I think runners are driven people. They're a lot of times type A kind of people where that can
Yeah.
be a struggle of knowing when they need to do it and how they need to do it. So
No, I love it. Some of it's a balance, right? And all goes back to that plan you talked about first. So like not just realizing a plan is telling someone to perform or run one day. A plan is just as much telling someone you need to rest
yeah,
after that day,
absolutely,
and making that
absolutely,
a part of the cadence. And to your point,
yep,
even when you have those days where you get off plan, for lack of a better word, you give yourself some gentleness to say, hey, like it's just not in me today. I can
right.
go forward and kind of push and risk hurting myself, or I can really
Mm-hmm.
look at what the overall goal is. I'm preparing for this race, or I need to hit this pace, or what can I do today to help meet that goal, and adjust along the way, right?
Exactly. And what you can do that day sometimes is nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like it can
Yep.
be like I need to go have a beer and relax. And like that is the most beneficial thing that I can do for my running goals today. And I think that is truly one of the areas that I mean genes, genetics, all of that separate the elite runners from the average adult runner. But I think
Yep.
one thing that elite runners are much, much better than the average adult runner at doing is running easy, taking days off when they need to, pushing a like hard speed workout back a few days if they don't feel ready yet, and just being willing to have that flexibility. I see that a
Yeah.
lot more in people sort of at the higher levels of the sport than sort of your average adult recreational runner.
And you talked about how we process, right, the running, right? So we talk a lot about mental health here in terms of
Mm-hmm.
just, again, everyone being human, and having ways to process things in a positive way. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's rest, whether it's running itself, that's one thing that running's been really helpful for me, is my mental health, right? Everyone talks about the runner's
Absolutely.
high. Even with work, right? There's some days where the most productive things, like I'm waiting to do on Mondays sometimes, is
Yeah.
log off my computer, go for a run, and all those
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 problems I hadn't figured out how to like navigate, I'll typically work on the treadmill. I think literally at this point,
Sure.
80% of my hard problems are solved on the treadmill or out on the run.
Yeah.
I'm not even joking. Like,
No,
it's
no, I
so
believe it.
amazing.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
how was you know how has running been helpful for not just your mental health, but what you see in your clients and the community
Yeah.
that you help run as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think you see it the most when people get hurt and they can't run. And
Yep.
how much of a struggle that is, as I think
Yep.
sometimes the first time that people really understand how important it is to them, not just
Yeah.
from a physical side, which again makes injury prevention pretty high on my priority list, right?
Yep.
Because all of us are using this, I think, in one way or another for mental health.
Yeah.
And that's the phrase that I use for myself all the time, right? Because people say, "Oh, are you training for anything?" It's like, no, I run for mental health these days, right? Like,
Yeah.
I run to burn off steam, just to be outside and moving, like you said, to problem solve, to think things through, and I love it, and it's different than how I loved it, 25 years ago when I was training to race as fast as I could, but I still enjoy it just as much, and that was an adjustment, but I think the mental side of it, not just from the runner's high, but also from the I'm gonna rely on my sociological background here a little bit.
Yeah.
Most people have a pretty big disconnect from what they do in their jobs and what the end product is. And I think running is one of the areas
Yeah.
where they can feel and they can see I put in this work and this happened and I achieved this time at this race, and it's a connection to the end product that doesn't always exist in the rest of our lives. And I think almost nobody thinks about that when they're out there running.
Yep.
But I do think
Yep.
it's a big piece of the enjoyment and the mental health piece of it that comes from it. And so, I usually keep that theory to myself. I don't, but I do think that that's part of why running is so appealing to a lot of people.
No, I couldn't agree more, right? It's I tell people even now, like, I work out whether it's running or lifting weights for mental health, but to your point, that instant feedback, right? Again, life is not a sprint, it's a marathon, but that is
Right.
one way in each moment to practice mindfulness, to go out there and run and get that immediate feedback. And sometimes, to your point, it's a hard day and it may feel a bit harder than others. Some days, like, I
Right.
feel great, I can run 5 more.
Right. But to compare it to, say, like a sales job, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're working on sales, somebody else is working on the
Yeah.
product, somebody else, and
Yep.
so, you just like, it's not like somebody else is running the workouts for you and then you run the race and you're like, oh, well, this was great. I mean, it's you're involved with every step of the process. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, I think that's unique. And I think,
Yeah.
so one of my other
Yeah.
hobbies is woodworking, and I think it's the same appeal, right? Like that
Yeah.
you are there for every step of the process, and then you have this end result. So
Yeah. It's a practice of mindfulness, and it helps physiologically, it helps for our mental health, and it's an amazing thing to
yeah,
do. Right? That's
no,
that's
it's
my
great.
spiel.
It's
That's
great.
my
Yes,
spiel.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I know we're getting towards the end of the episode. Coach Carl, thank you just for the lessons that you've shared with me today, with our listeners, and just for being a great coach for me in my running and mental health the past months here. You've shared so much with us in our community in terms of gyms. What can we do to give back to Coach Carl?
Yeah, so I do, we talked about the education piece of it, and because it is something that I enjoy talking about so much, I do put more of that stuff. Like, I'm not a big social media guy. I'm not like super active, but on Instagram, on Run Coach Carl, I try to at least once a week, put up thoughts about, like, whether it's training tips, whether it's different workouts that I really like that I think people can work into their running in different ways, all those sorts of things. So you can check that out. And I really enjoy making educational videos on my YouTube channel. You can just search Coach Carl for that. My youngest starts kindergarten in the fall. So that is when I will actually have time to start making YouTube videos again consistently. So between now and then, you can watch the ones that are already up there, but I plan on being more consistent with that starting in August.
And then you also have a website, right, for those who are looking
Correct.
to reach out to you and start running. What is the website? Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, it's running Coach Carl, and that's with a C, .com.
Yep, that's runningcoachcarl.com. Well,
Yep.
thank you so much, Coach Carl. I
Yeah,
appreciate you
thank
as
you.
always.
Yeah,
Looking forward to maybe having another one of these sometime down the road, but just thank you for being awesome and for guiding me on this journey
of
as well.
course. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wait, friend, before you move on, take the time to gift yourself the sea of clarity or community. With so many pools for our time and attention today, one of the best gifts we can gift ourselves is a moment to simply breathe and be present, to gently process our experiences, emotions, and thoughts with grace and non judgment. To do this, take the next 2 remaining minutes of today's episode to practice simply paying attention to yourself, or maybe gift yourself and or others community by connecting with us online. You can thank today's guest, share your experience and lessons, or connect with others as well. To do this, go to the website c3.community or our C3 Community LinkedIn page, or of course, our YouTube channel. As always, friend, thank you for listening in and for choosing to be a part of our community. We hope you take a few precious moments for yourself. See you soon.